Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 204 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And it is Saturday, the 13th of May 2023 as I record this. And today's episode is on why many autistic people don't like function labels. And this podcast episode I think is absolutely brilliant. I get really personal in it, and this is just so much fun because this is it's not so much a silly topic from my point of view. It's just that this is really annoying, and even though this is coming from a really good place, when people say you're low functioning or you're high functioning, it is one of the most annoying things imaginable. And this episode, I really do get into it in a very positive, very joyous, and to be honest, quite a funny way, because to me and tons of other autistic people, this is just our biggest pet hate, and I think it's so beyond annoying. So you've got that to look forward to, and yeah, this is a really informative podcast episode. So, but moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one I think is brilliant. Ghosts and gaps. Supernatural beliefs fill similar unknowns across cultures. Wherever you look in the world, you'll find supernatural explanations. Everything from earthquakes and diseases to its success are in some groups attributed to the acts of deities, demons, witches, or spirits. The long-standing God of the Gaps hypothesis holds that when people don't understand a phenomenon, they tend to infer that a supernatural agent has to be responsible. But does that only apply to events that have no clear scientific explanation or for anything with an ambiguous cause? So even though there's a new paper, which is what the article actually links to, I want to address a slightly larger point. So I think this God of the Gaps hypothesis is really true though, because not to get into religion too much, because I know that sets quite a lot of people on edge, and people argue and get quite nasty about it at times. But if you think about it logically, back in the day, and before the rise of science though, but religion made absolutely perfect sense. Masculine stuff though, but because of, for example, diseases and the Black Death, we didn't know whether it was caused by diseases and other naturally occurring stuff though. So but the idea that it's God's judgment makes a perfect sense though, because it explains why it's happening, and it explains why it happened on such a big number though, because of course tons of people are bad. God gets angry about you being bad, so he kills you. So it makes a perfect sense though. That and crop failure is another good example though, but because if all of your crops fail, leaving starvation, well, you obviously don't understand why the crops fail. So the idea that gods are punishing your community for evil deeds makes sense. Or the idea that witches are being evil, or demons are possessing your community, I really have no idea. I'm not really into these beliefs at all though, but my point is that it makes sense. I really do agree with this high hypothesis, and every year I try and find something around Halloween time about paranormal psychology, but I can never find stuff, sadly. This year will hopefully be different, but I just thought that's interesting. And the second one is binding moral values linked to support for perpetrators of sexual harassment. Previous research has found that women who speak up about sexual misconduct are more likely to experience consequences such as job losses, decreased job satisfaction, and ostracism at work. Male perpetrators, however, are far less likely to experience the same. New findings suggest that not only can reporting sexual misconduct be seen as more morally offensive than the misconduct itself, but that sympathy towards perpetrators and anger towards victims can drive unjust outcomes. There's honestly not much I can say about this besides from the fact that this is disgusting and it's wrong. Because how are we meant to combat sexual harassment if we're punishing victims? And I find some social media is a good example of this. Well, I offer this though, whenever a sexual misconduct case ever goes to a trial, though, but because I've been focusing on the Crown Prosecution Service quite a bit lately in the UK, and they will not take a case to court though. Unless they believe that there's enough evidence. Of course, it does not mean at all that the person is automatically guilty, but assuming that they're automatically innocent just because a woman has apparently decided to overreact and just play the sexual harassment card. And yes, I have seen that on social media, and I think that is absolutely appalling. Yeah, it is just wrong though. Blaming victims is wrong, and automatically thinking that perpetrators are just innocent, I think it's just really wrong though. So this is something we do need to fix it. And even though we know this is a problem, I have no idea how we counteract this. So yes, we know the theory behind this, but how do we apply the theory to the real world problem? I don't know. What do you think? And the final one I think, is a little weird, but I do want to cover it. Elsewhere on the web, people in a petri dish. Researchers in Japan and Taiwan suggest it's time to start the conversation on the legal personhood of human brain organoids. Though these small clumps of cells help cognitive scientists study particular tricky to investigate brain processes, their future forms are likely to pose some tricky legal questions. Okay, now that's interesting. Because I know the basic premise of this is basically that because these things actually have brains that work basically like ours, and because they're going to get better and better in the future to basically human cognitive levels, they're basically, I don't know, I sort of presume that the end goal is to make these guys sentient. But then what do you do? Legally, because of course legally it's you cannot kill a sentient human, you cannot kill a person who can think and make decisions, but then of course we weren't bred for the purpose of research, we were bred for the purpose of living, and mainly because our parents just decided that they wanted kids one night. Yeah, one night there, but of course these people were bred for research. And of course, they're not even people, they're brains. So I think that's a very interesting legal question because, yes, that we need these small clumps of brain cells that will in the future become proper brains, I presume, to do research. But then, if you look at the idea of that they're just brains, then what's the real difference between these brains for research and our brains? There's basically going to be none. So I think it will be interesting for legal questions though, because you are basically killing and just sacrificing human brains that work the exact same as our ones. So I don't know, I think it's very complex. And I think that these researchers are really clever for actually finding out ways to actually grow these brains that can be used to study these difficult processes, because we do need to deepen our understanding. But it'd be interesting if anyone raises ethical or legal concerns in the future, especially if these clumps of cells do get as effective and as good as people predict, just so they're basically like ours identically in the future. So that's enough for the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week's been very busy because I've had my first exams, and wow, to be honest, these are my first ever proper university exams because okay, not well, but because as most of you know, like by now, I started university in September 2019, and then COVID was March 2020, so I had my exams online. And everyone knows first year exams, they're basically just multiple choice in my experience. And then second year, there was sort of a mixture of some weird questions and then some essays. Well, some essays though, but this year it was very much just essays and proper exams though. So that was quite interesting. Well, interesting though, but as all of the university students on the podcast know, they're very, very difficult in terms of what to revise because some of the topics or some of the questions covered topics or covered features of topics that was literally one slide in like 100 PowerPoint slides. Slide presentations. That was quite interesting. Very difficult at times. But I'm confident that I've done well. So I've now done both my clinical psychology exams, and now it's just my applying psychology exam on Wednesday, and then I'll be done. I'll be done with university, so I'm really, really excited about. So besides some revision, I know I mentioned last week, so I'm going to mention it this week. I did go to Postmortem Live. I originally imagined I would have a lot to talk about. Personally, because I'm not negative on this podcast, unless I'm trying to like make quite a like funny point, I don't mention it, so I'm actually not going to talk about it. But if you're interested in that sort of thing, definitely go, I guess. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Wiley or leave a comment on the Facebook post at Connor Whiteley, psychology author. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Developmental Psychology, a guide to child and developmental psychology. So the reason why this is the sponsored product for the second week in a row is not only because does autism impact like development, and this great, really easy to understand book allows you to understand how neurotypical children develop in terms of their cognitive development, how their play and social development happens. In addition to tons of other great processes, including my absolute favourite, cross-cultural development. Love that chapter. I find it honestly fascinating. But towards the end of this book, though, well, it actually does focus on a range of neurodevelopmental conditions, including like Williams syndrome and autism. And to be honest, me writing that autism chapter was the first time I started to get a bit more personal about that side of life. So if you definitely want to understand autism more, understand me a bit more, then that definitely is an absolute brilliant chapter that you're going to enjoy though. And like all of my books, it's written in a really easy to understand and engaging way. My books are never like boring textbooks that you read for university courses. So that's Developmental Psychology, a guide to developmental and child psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And you can buy the ebook directly from me at payhip.com/Connor Whiteley. So whilst buying books helps us to support the podcast and my creation of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my patrons. So thank you to all of my wonderful patrons, because your support shows that you find the show useful and that you want it to continue. And if you wanted to support the podcast for a few dollars, pounds, or whatever your currency is each month, and get tons of other great benefits, including early access to a lot of stuff, then please go to patreon.com/Connor Whiteley. Links in the podcast description. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about why a lot of autistic people hate functional labels. Yeah, I'm definitely one of them. Hate them, and basically I'm going to explain why, and I'm also going to draw on some research and some other stuff that I found. And as always, references for all of these podcast episodes can always be found on the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and then just find today's episode. What's high functioning and low functioning autism? Personally, I know these autism types, I say in air quotes, come from well-meaning people that believe that autism is a debilitating neurodevelopmental disease. But of course it isn't a disease. And if you have the disease, then you are doomed to fail and struggle in life. I know that is how a lot of people see autism, but they are completely wrong. And to be honest, they create a lot more problems than they could ever hope to solve. Since autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, and yes, people with severe autism who are rendered unable to speak, unable to walk, and unable to remotely live a clinically normal life, autism could be awful for them. I'm not denying that at all, and that is not the point of today's episode. However, for a lot of people, myself included, autism isn't a problem, and it's that word problem that I'm focusing on. It is a great part of us that brings us a lot of joy, happiness, and laughter. My autism gives me the ability to focus, learn, and have an immense drive for the few areas that I really, really care about. But like podcasting, writing, and psychology. And it gives me the courage to stand up for what's right, because to be honest, I could not care less about social norms and offending certain people's feelings. And there will always be struggles, and I do seriously struggle in the social aspects of my life. I mean, seriously. And without speech therapy when I was younger, I would be mute, because I was mute for the first few years of life. But to think that because I'm autistic, I'm doomed to fail and struggle is just silly. Really, really silly. As well as to call me high functioning because I can have a job, because I can live a relatively normal life, and because I can go to university is just insulting. Since there were times in my life when I would have loved, truly loved to have some support about this infuriating, complex, and to be honest, cruel social world. But again, because I was high functioning, I was denied support, help, and any chance of people for making my life easier. Overall, an autistic person is called high functioning if they can hold down a job, live a normal life, and do so many things that non-autistic people can do. Whereas a low functioning person is one that cannot hold down a job, and they conform to the endless stereotypes about autism. Finally, for this section, whatever type of autism you have, life is still a struggle. You can be an autistic person and feel strange, out of place, abnormal in this world. So even when a kind person says you're high functioning, well done. This is so lost on us because it's meaningless and it invalidates the reasons why we want support and help in the first place. what's the myth of being high functioning? Another reason why high functioning is such a silly myth is because all it really is masking behaviour. Autistic people can learn the skills of masking early on in childhood because it's a survival mechanism. It helps us blend in with other neurotypicals, and when we conform to the social norms of this neurotypical world, we get rewarded. Simple as that. This masking tends to be learned through a treatment, of course, never an option free, socialization, parenting, and other ways that social skills are taught to us. This all helps autistic people to mask their ideas and these autistic tendencies growing up so that they could function, especially when the world tells autistic people that their natural behaviours are flat out aversive and wrong. So the reward for that was being called high functioning, and when they asked for help, they weren't believed that they needed help. That's what happens to a lot of my friends over the years, and myself included. Personally, if you ask anyone that knows me, they will say I never struggled, never needed any help, and I was always great at making friends. Even though in the last few years they've realised that's not true. To you, I would say I was an expert masker, because any autistic person I talk to always knows I'm autistic the moment I open my mouth. But any non-autistic person, they're surprised, but then they start nodding after a few seconds later, as they understand why I do a lot of the stuff I do. Because I can be extremely brutal. I don't have a filter, and if a person is being disgustingly wrong, I will tell them because I don't care about the social norms of the world. Thankfully, I always make people laugh when I'm being brutal. Believe me, that is a godsend in recent years. That seriously is. However, a lot of my childhood was masking behaviour. I struggled to make friends. I struggled to function in brand new, scary environments with tons of new people. I hated change with a passion. I hated having to do new things. I hated a lot about my teenage years because people were outrageously cruel to odd people or people that are different to them. And this led to massive, massive problems for me because people would think I was doing something because I was cruel, evil, or just weird, when in reality it was because I'm autistic and no one cared. No one wanted to help me. Because, of course, I was high functioning. And no, I'm not bitter about that at all. How functioning labels impact autism suicide rate. Interestingly, Southall of 2021 wrote a great article that investigated the unknown epidemic of suicides among autistic adults, with them concluding that the act of masking is a significant contributor to these high suicide rates. This is because by calling someone high functioning, a person is invalidating all of their struggles, all the difficulties, all the feelings of that autistic person. So they become trapped in a cycle of learning daily living behaviours, masking their autistic behaviours, and maintaining their life. And that gets old after a while, especially because masking does force autistic people to endure a lot of negatives, because the world has told us that an autistic behaviour is aversive and wrong and it should never be shown. In my opinion, I hate being called high functioning, as you might have been able to tell by this episode, because I have always really, really wanted someone to sit me down, or at least ask me, and say something along the lines of, "How are you? I know you're a good student, great writer, podcaster, and business person, but how are you coping with life?" Or is it something when they're asking me how I'm actually feeling? It is something as simple as that I would love, because people, they've never allowed me to talk about my struggles because they don't think I have any. And again, that's not their fault. Honestly, I'm not blaming anyone in my life, but it's just that this is sort of that part of the myths and part of the ideas behind high functioning. It's a shame, and I forced myself to soldier through anything, and I have found outlets for my behaviour and my tendencies, like the reputation for being the man that makes people laugh because of his brutal opinions. And to be honest, that is actually great fun. What's the stigma of low functioning autism? On the flip side, lots of autistic people have low functioning labels too, because these are just as damaging. Due to autistic people with a low functioning label are stigmatized and isolated, as well as their strengths are ignored and they are seen by everyone as incapable of anything. Something I love about low functioning people is that there are some mute autistic people in the world, but they are amazing writers. They can write their feelings with such depth and clarity that I doubt even neurotypicals could actually do that. And that's how therapy sessions can be done. Yet no one cares about their writing skills. They are still only low functioning. People who don't talk and their facial expressions are flat or they aren't right for the context of the situation. No one cares about the person's inner workings. Probably because it's too hard for people to understand that or want to think about. Again, I'm honestly not criticizing people, especially because in cognitive psychology, there's the idea that people are cognitive misers because people don't want to think any more than they actually want to, which is why we categorize people. Why the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, text revision, might be better for autistic people. So, as you guys know from other podcast episodes, and whenever I talk about the DSM, and the amount of other psychologists agree with me, and also the amount of research on it, is that basically there are immense problems with the DSM-5. There seriously are though, and we do need a new way to mental health, which is what I've spoken about with High Top before. But until that happens, the DSM-5 text revision could be slightly interesting for autistic people, because this version offers a slightly better way to offer support for autistic people that isn't based on functionality. Since the DSM-5 text revision proposes that there are 3 levels of support, but it doesn't offer any reasons as to be the autistic people needing the support. Therefore, it doesn't limit different types of support for different levels of functioning labels. Level 1 is all about people needing some support. For example, the autistic person might need some daily functioning help, but they can do a lot of it on their own. Level 2 is about the autistic person needing a lot of help. Level 3 is the autistic people needing a lot of help. Overall, this approach is better because the approach isn't tied to high or low functioning. It's all about what the autistic person needs themselves and how much support is needed for them to live comfortably, happily, and without unneeded psychological distress. Why autism needs to be a will and not a spectrum. Personally, I flat out love this idea, and I'm really glad that I found it. As a result, a lot of autistic people prefer the idea that autism is a will instead of an autistic spectrum, due to the problem with a spectrum is that it's linear, so an autistic person is either a little bit or very autistic. That flat out does not reflect the real world experiences of autistic people. Instead, autistic people prefer to be seen as people with different needs and wants. I do not have a problem with that at all. Therefore, a will of autism helps to acknowledge and understand that some autistic people experience anxiety more than others. Other autistic people might struggle with sensory aversions. Others still might struggle more with communication because they talk too much or not at all. In addition, some autistic people might be paralyzed by depression. Others might have a mixture of these difficulties, or none of the others mentioned. Overall, being autistic isn't about a line between having a little autism and a lot of it. Being autistic is about a spectrum or range of traits that all autistic people have to various extents, and the rule acknowledges that all autistic people struggle and need help, as well as high functioning autism is a myth, and low functioning is just stigmatizing. Conclusion. So I really want to finish off this podcast episode by mentioning that for most of history, academic researchers and parents have been the voice of autism. Now, that is not a bad thing necessarily, but because the researchers and parents like functioning labels, that's why they're staying about and they're not going to change within the near future. Many autistic people don't like them. They prefer to be seen as humans with struggles and successes, like everyone else, but they just need a little bit more support depending on their own situation. So if you take anything away from this podcast episode, please let it be that functional labels are awful, they're damaging, and I know if you've used them, you were trying to be a good person, and thank you for that. I really do appreciate it. But it is damaging. We need to change that dialogue so functioning labels are a thing of the past, and we can start to support everyone that needs help, and we recognise the strengths and how amazing everyone can be, whether they have autism or not. Finally, personally, I don't think autism is a disability, because it has given me my drive, focus, and everything I value in my life. It makes me me. I wouldn't change it for the world. Granted, I have lost friends. I've had so much hate thrown at me, and people have been foul towards me. I've experienced awful things because of autism that I doubt anyone could even begin to imagine. But I still wouldn't change my autism for the world. It's difficult, it's a struggle, and it can be a right pain at times. But I'm happy with who I am, and all I ask is for the right to get help when I need it. Something that myself and tons of other high functioning types have been denied so far. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did. This is the most personal I've ever been, and I'm really glad about it. And I hope that came through in my voice that this was a really passionate podcast episode. So I enjoyed it. I really hope you did. If you know someone who will enjoy today's episode, then please share it to them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more about autism, then please check out Developmental Psychology, a guide to developmental and child psychology, available in all the usual places, and you can buy it directly from me at payhip.com/conwhiteley. And if you wanted early access and to become a patron of the show, then please go to patreon.com/the Psychology Wire Podcast. Link in the podcast description. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.